And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today we are going to be tackling another Dice Throne hero. We're going to help you build a better turn for the Monk. So before we get into the strategy details and the review of how to play this hero, there's a few things that I want to get out of the way to begin with. First, all of the strategy suggestions that I have come from a kind of specific place. So there's a couple different ways to think about this. First of all, there's tournaments versus like playing at your kitchen table with your family in like a more casual way, your friends at game night. Not everybody is going to be a tournament player, and that's fine. Not everybody is going to only play casual. In fact, there's some games where I got into them playing casually and now I'm only interested in playing them at tournaments. So, while I think it's totally valid that whatever way you choose to engage with the game, as long as you're having fun, you're doing it right. So that's true. However, the focus of this video is going to be on maximizing your monk play within the tournament scene in Dice Throne. So I'm going to go deep on some of the strategies and I'm going to get into the nitty gritty about choices that you make with dice that you re-roll, cards that you sell, stuff like that. And if at any point you start to feel like, oh man, this really isn't the kind of analysis I wanted, that's fine. You can skip ahead, you can skip around, and that's totally okay. For the people that do want the more detailed, granular strategy discussion around the monk, that's going to be the prime purpose of this video. Similarly, even if we agree that playing in tournaments is awesome, and it is awesome, I think you should do it, but even if we agree that playing in tournaments is awesome and that's something that we want to do, there are different valid ways to look at these different heroes in a competitive setting. Not every player who plays in tournaments is going to play Monk exactly the same way I do, so there's kind of an asterisk on this whole video that these are the strategies that work for me. These are the strategies that I like. And if you have a different strategy, whether it's a kitchen table strategy or a different tournament strategy, and you disagree with me or think that I'm wrong, that's totally cool. Throw it in the comments below. Maybe I can learn something from you. All that housekeeping stuff out of the way, let's actually talk about the monk. But before we get into any of the specifics in his kit, I do want to set the table one last time with the two main ways to think about the monk. So like a lot of heroes in Dice Throne, there is flexibility between these two different modes, but I think the monk, maybe more than any other character, has two very clear paths. Again, you can flex between these two paths, but the sorts of things that you want to be doing, if you in your head decide, I need to be defensive, you go into the Turtle Monk strategy, and it's very distinct from the sorts of things that the Beatdown Monk or the Aggressive Monk strategy is going to do. So let's set the table on that to begin with. So the Turtle Monk, the defense monk, is going to focus primarily on trying to use your chi as a way to mitigate damage. I'll get into talking about chi in more detail later. But you're going to be using your resources that are available to try to reduce your opponent's incoming damage as much as possible, either by chipping it down with the chi or using the evasive to reduce it to zero, whatever it is. You want to take as little damage as possible while at the same time chipping away at your opponent. And it doesn't matter if you're doing less than average damage. Generally speaking, we want to see about 8 damage on a turn. That's average damage output. That's what I like to see in a hero. Even if we're doing less than 8, that's irrelevant if our opponent is doing even less than that. We're still going to get there in the end. Now, the flip side of this is the beatdown monk. I come from Magic, so the term beatdown is kind of a generic catch-all for the aggressive or the person in the matchup who's trying to end the game as fast as possible. It's generally kind of a good way to think about these types of dueling games as one player being the beatdown and one player being the control. The control player wants to slow things down. They want to blunt whatever aggression is coming off the other player, and the beatdown wants to speed things up and do as much damage as possible, get the game over, and go have a snack before the next round starts. Monk is very, very good at having distinct, defined archetypes within his kit that says this is a turtle monk move, this is a beatdown monk move. Again, some matchups are going to require you to be able to flex between these two modes, and that's kind of the beauty of Dice Throne. The other thing to consider is knowing what mode to pick. So if you're fighting against an aggressive hero, and generally speaking, when I start talking about aggro heroes, I'm going to say Pyromancer. It's not the only aggressive hero, but it's kind of the platonic ideal of an aggressive hero. So when you're in a fight with Pyromancer, if you're both trying to go toe-to-toe and deal damage for damage, Pyro is going to get there way higher percentage of the time. You can't out beat down the best beatdown in the game. You just can't do it. Monk has good beatdown, he doesn't have the best beatdown. So that would be a matchup where you would want to lean more heavily into the defensive, the Turtle Monk, and try to erase as much damage as possible while chipping away here and there where you can to punish your opponent and try to get ahead on that health race while trying to avoid taking as much damage as possible. Whereas if we look at a character that's really, really good at the slow control style, again, Shadow Thief is not the only hero that behaves this way, but it's kind of the platonic ideal of the control late game hero. You've got to beat them before they get to their end game state. That's the thing about the monk. He doesn't have some end game state that he transitions into where he gets more powerful. So his defensive path only carries you so far. It doesn't, there's no payoff. You look at a hero like Shadow Thief, they avoid damage, and then at the end there's a big payoff where they can come back and deal a ton of damage. That's not what our Turtle Monk is doing. Our Turtle Monk is trying to reduce damage, avoid taking hits, but also put damage out whenever those opportunities present itself. Aggressive Monk is going to try to do basically the opposite. It's going to be all damage all the time, pound the pedal to the gas, and try to get that Shadow Thief killed before they reach that end state where our defensive tools are just not going to be good enough anymore. So those are the two main tracks that I think we need to keep in mind when we think about how you play the monk in Dice Throne. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the pamphlet. So the monk has 4 status effects, which we'll go through each of these in detail here in a minute. And the oddest die facing of maybe any hero. There are not a lot of heroes that go 2-1, 2-1. So he's got 2 fists, the palm, 2 Zens, and the Lotus. A 2-2-1-1 dice face scheme is kind of unusual, can be awkward, and for his to be laid out as 2-1-2-1 is just kind of a unique feature of the monk himself. So let's start with Chi. Now this is the bread and butter core thing that you need to be thinking about as the monk. This is, you don't have a combat point economy to deal with this hero. You have a chi economy. The sub economy of chi matters so much to this character. And yes, that does mean he is incredibly vulnerable to a well-timed what status effects. Much like Artificer or any hero that depends on accruing status effects and then using them in the right moments, the correct time WSE can really backbreak somebody. So what does a chi do? You collect the chi, and then once you have it on you, you can have up to 5 of them. And when you're defending, you can spend it to reduce damage by 1. So if you're at a full stack of chi, it's basically like a not this time, just in status effects on your board. You can also spend chi to increase your attack. Now you can't spend the chi as soon as you get it. You have to do it on a subsequent turn, and in my opinion, that is meaningful. It means the beatdown monk is going to be more vulnerable to chi removal, preventing him from doing the thing that he wants to do than the turtle monk is. If you're being super defensive and you get a bunch of chi on your defense, you spend it immediately. Even if you're being super aggressive and you get chi on your attack, you can't spend it till next turn. And you don't really want to spend it on defense when you're trying to lean into aggression. So just based on the way the chi status effect works, I think it favors the defensive monk a little bit. To move down to the next status effect, Evasive. We have talked about Evasive on the channel before. This shows up on a number of different heroes. And it is not the most powerful defensive status effect, but it is up there. It is very strong. So with Evasive, you spend it, you roll a die, and you have a 1/3 shot of taking no damage at all. This status effect is very important for defense monk. You do not want to be taking damage, and this soaks it much more effectively than just spending a bunch of chi does. It also makes the what status effects not feel as good. Like if I just have the evasive there and you want to make sure that you force your damage through, do you spend the what status effects or do you wait until there's some chi to remove? So having evasive on your board when you don't also have chi can put the opponent in these awkward turns where it's like, I really want to push this attack through, but I don't want to spend the status removal at this inopportune moment. Now, things like get that out of here. Obviously, that can pick off an evasive. I do not think you should be spending single target removals on chi unless it is like a win the game situation. You should not be buying chi unless it's 1 point is the difference between your attack killing the other person and it not killing. So the broad removal, the what status effects, that's the removal that Monk really cares about. And evasive, it can kind of help draw that out and then protect your chi stack later. So that's something to think about. Knockdown. This is a control effect. Forces the opponent to spend 2 combat points or skip their offensive roll phase. They may as well have just made this token say your opponent loses 2 CP. No one is ever going to skip their offensive roll phase. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. You will always draw a card, gain a coin, and you'll have the ability to sell that card, even if it's an important card. It's not as important as your whole ORP. So knockdown can slow people down. It can be a little bit disruptive to their economy and what they want to do. It can force them to sell cards they really didn't want to sell. So there are like effective control-y things that knockdown can do, but the idea that somebody's going to miss their ORP, that's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Cleanse. So this is maybe the most situational status effect for Monk. This is incredibly powerful in some of the matchups where you want a powerful tool, like against a burn on a pyro, or against a poison on a shadow thief, or many other options. Any of the persistent damage over time effects, cleanse is really good against because it just knocks a leg out of the strategy for that other hero. Like pyro really likes burn. It's an important part of how the pyro wins the game. And cleanse, it comes so freely, it comes all the time. It's almost not even worth it to put the burn on. Now you still put the burn on because you got to make the monk spend the cleanse. But it's in some matchups, this status effect by itself can be instrumental in winning the game, and then in other matchups, it's a completely dead status that does absolutely nothing. So maybe more than any of the other status effects, this one is matchup dependent. All right, so we made our way through the pamphlet. Now let's take a look at the complete character board. So as always, the artwork on every single one of these just knocks it out of the park. Manny's art is fantastic, and the monk is no exception. I say that every time, but I think it's nice to take a moment to appreciate how beautiful this game is. It's not only beautiful in the sense that it is a masterpiece of mechanics and a lot of fun to play, but it's beautiful aesthetically. It pleases the eyes. All right, so we'll take a look at some of the monk's abilities. We're going to start with Fist Strike. So this is the basic attack. And at 6, 7, 8, your first impulse might be like, oh, that's actually really good damage on a basic attack. And that's true, it is, but we have to remember that the monk doesn't have 3 faces of fist. He only has 2. His layout is 2-1, 2-1. So this is not half your dice half the faces on your dice have the potential to help you get this basic attack. So while the damage is a little better than average, the impact or the ability to get to it is a little harder than average. And the net result kind of puts this basic attack it's fine. I mean, most basic attacks aren't fantastic, and you take them if you get them. If we take a look at the upgrades that are available for Fist Strike, 1 cost for Fist Strike 2, it takes it to 7, 8, 9. That is an improvement, but do you want to be rolling basic attacks and you have less of a chance of actually hitting them? That said, it is a little bit appealing to only need 3 dice faces to deal 7 damage. That feels pretty good, especially when you think about some other heroes that are dealing like 4 damage for 3 dice face. So there is something there. Now, this is one of those abilities that has 2 upgrades we could potentially get. So if we look at Fist Strike 3, it costs an additional combat point, and it stays at the 7, 8, 9, and you have a fleetingly small, difficult to roll for chance for knockdown, which is not a status effect I'm that invested in either. On aggro path, if I'm a beatdown monk, I don't care about knockdown hardly at all. If I'm on the defensive path, I care about it a little bit more, but neither path really puts me in a place where I really want to pay for this upgrade. In my opinion, if you're going to upgrade the basic at all, I think you're better off upgrading 1, it's cheaper, This one, I just can't see being worth it. I think you're going to have to get that knockdown inflicted at least a couple times to make it feel like you got your money out of it. And at that point, what does that game look like? Where you're chasing basic attacks? I think Fist Strike 3 is probably an easy sell in basically every game. And I think Fist Strike 2 is probably also an easy sell in most games. So one thing that we should probably say here at the top of the analysis is that the monk does not have a combat point economy. His coin purse is going to be taxed in every single game. You're going to have to think about what cards you plan to sell, because you cannot get through these games without selling cards to fund doing the things that you care about. If you want to play those dice manipulation cards, you got to sell something. If you want to play these upgrades, you got to sell something. His natural combat point generation is going to put him behind many, many other heroes. And it's not like the Pyro, who has no combat point generation, but just it burns your face down, and they don't care about combat points because they're not trying to invest value in the board necessarily. They're just trying to burn you down. Monk is not that aggressive. His beatdown strategy isn't going to just outrace everybody and win every time. So there are going to be games that are going to have to go longer. Even if your prime strategy is to be the beatdown monk, there's going to be places within the game where you're going to have to take a turn off to rebuild resources, and you're going to have to think defensively, and that means you're going to have to sell some cards. And these first two upgrades, I think, are prime candidate sell cards. Neither of them is giving you that much of a buff, and it's a buff on an ability you really don't want to roll anyway. So we are going to take a look at Combo Strike next. So this requires 3 fists and 1 palm. You get 6 damage, and then you roll a d6, and you can either add 2 more damage, making it 8, which is nice. You could add 3 more damage, and if you get both of those, that adds 5, bringing it to 11, which is fantastic. You can gain 2 chi, and then you have a choice between evasive or cleanse. I really like that hitting the 6 gives you the choice between the 2 statuses, because one of those could be incredibly relevant and the other one could be incredibly dead, depending upon the matchup, and you have to roll a 6 to get it. So giving it a little bit extra, I think is totally reasonable. If you are on a beatdown monk path, this is an ability you're going to take if it presents itself. It can be hard to chase. You do have the fallback of just grabbing a fist strike if you go for the combo strike and can't get it, but this is one of those powers that if you can get it, I think you want to take it. All right, taking a look at the upgrade for this, Combo Strike 2 is going to cost you 2 combat points, lets you deal 5 and roll 2 dice. You have the ability to double up on your rider dice now. On the first level, you have on for the damage. So even if you roll multiple fists, you won't get multiple fist buffs. On this side, you could potentially do 4 damage, you could potentially do 6 damage, and this buff works its way down the whole card. You gain 2 chi per Zen symbol that you roll, and for each Lotus, you can choose an evasive or a cleanse. So all of these things become stackable at level 2, even though the damage goes down, which feels bad. Bear in mind, with rolling the 2 rider dice and the way the buffs work, this is probably going to end up as a damage plus the vast preponderance of times, and everything else about this upgrade is good. If you have the 2 combat points to spend, this seems like an upgrade I think you can think about if you're on a beatdown monk path. If you're on the defense monk path, this is a good option. This is a good damage output option, and it feeds your economy with the chi. It potentially feeds your evasion economy. All of these things are things that you want as the turtle monk, but you got to make choices. Depending upon what the rest of my hand looked like, this feels like it could be a sell in a game where you're planning on it going a little bit longer. This is not going to give you as much in the turtle path compared to the beatdown path. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Moving to meditate. Now this is the turtle monk backbone, bread and butter. And even the beatdown monk, while you don't want to choose this, sometimes you just have to. Well, actually, let's address that. So given how awkward the monk's die faces are, the 2-1, 2-1 facing, there are going to be games where you make the decision beforehand, you look at your cards, you look at your opponent, and you go, okay, beatdown path for me. And then you throw the first set of dice, and you get 3 5s, and you go, oh, or not 3, 3, 4, or 5s, and you go, oh, I guess I choose Meditate. So it is useful to think about chi as the thing that it does. If you're on beatdown path, think about that chi as deal 5 damage. Now, I fully acknowledge it has to sit on your board for a turn, and it makes it vulnerable. This ability is very delicious to hit with a what status effects. I get my 5 chi, I get my evasive or my cleanse, whatever is appropriate for the matchup. I'm ready to go. Next turn, I'm going to come hit you in the chin and you what status effects and you just get everything. It's rough. But this is the game. When you choose to play Monk, this is the game you play. And this guy shows up at the tournament level because of his flexibility. He shows up because he has good matchups against a variety of different things in the field. And if we're talking about bans, if my lineup is like Thor or Shadow Thief, you're gonna ban those before you ban the Monk. So the Monk is a guy who can get through bans and still have good games into a whole bunch of different matchups because of his flexibility. So again, Meditate, one of the most important powers on the entire board. If you're in Turtle Monk mode, it's really important to hit this early and often and keep that chi up. And even as beatdown Monk, there are going to be games where you want that extra chi for the damage. The evasive is less valuable, the cleanse is matchup dependent, but this is a really important power for the Monk. To take a look at the upgrade, Meditate 2. This costs 2 combat points. You now gain 6 chi, and remember, the chi stack is only 5 when you start the game, but we'll talk about that more. But you get 6 chi, and you get the evasive and the cleanse. You no longer have to make a choice. I don't very much care about getting both. Yes, and in the matchups where cleanse matters, you want both, obviously. But evasive is far more valuable across basically the preponderance of matchups. You always want the evasive, you sometimes want the cleanse, and with this upgrade, you get both. You also get Zen Strike. So it's going to require 2 1 or 2s and 2 4 or 5s, and you deal 6 damage and gain 2 chi, giving us kind of 8 damage if you think about chi in terms of future damage for beatdown Monk. This makes it just dead on average damage output that's not that hard to roll for. So most of the time, I talk a lot of trash about backup abilities on upgrades. I think a lot of backup abilities are fallbacks. They literally are something you don't want, but you end up on because you have no other option. This one's kind of good. This is a good backup ability. This deals realistic, important damage. If you're going for this as a Turtle Monk, you still get a little bit of chi and you get some damage output. I see this as being a very strong upgrade. This is an upgrade that I think you're probably, if you see it anywhere in the early to mid game, you probably want it. And maybe you even play it late if you're on a Turtle Monk strategy, but that might be pushing it. Once you get late enough in the game, these setup abilities become much, much less useful. It's dangerous on turn 7 to take a turn off to build up your chi. Now, if you can use that to soak all the damage your opponent throws at you on their turn, maybe you can get away with it. But if it's turn 7, you probably don't have the 2 extra combat points. You've probably drawn through enough of your deck that you'd much rather sell this and be able to play 6 it when you really need it. So late in the game, you probably sell this upgrade. But early game, especially if you're in the defense strategy, you pay this upgrade every time. And man, even as the beatdown Monk, Zen Strike is such a decent fallback. If you have the time to play this in the beatdown Monk, you probably want to there as well. This is a good card. This is one of the better upgrades that the Monk has available. Okay, next we're going to move down to Tempest Rush. So, in the same way that Meditate was the backbone, bread and butter, core power that was really important for Turtle Monk, we have now come to all of those same things for Beatdown Monk. Tempest Rush is the most important power on the board if you are in aggro Monk. It's your best damage option. You have to get 3 3s, which is, given that you only have the palm on the one die face, this is basically the same odds as rolling for a micro ult, which doesn't happen that often. So this is a more difficult thing to get. Even though you want it more than any other power on the board when you're in beatdown Monk mode, you're not going to get it every turn. The game doesn't work that way. But once you do get it, you get to roll 3 dice and deal damage equal to the total roll value. which means the ceiling is 18 and the floor is 3. So that's a very big spread. You can do less than half of one turn's average damage, or you can do more than 2 turns average damage all in one power, plus the added value of if you do at least 13. So if you really hurt somebody, you get to knock them down too. Of course, knockdown, as the status effects that the monk has to choose from, I think it's fine. It's fine. I don't think that's why you want to play Tempest Rush. I don't think that's why you go for this power, but when it hits, cool. And against certain heroes, especially other economy-starved heroes like the monk is, the knockdown can be real painful. So I don't want to throw too much shade at knockdown, but the reason you Tempest Rush is because you want to deal 18 damage to the dome, not because you care about the knockdown. All right, let's take a look at the upgrade for this. Tempest Rush 2, it only costs 1 combat point. You roll 3 dice, deal damage equal to the total roll value, so that's unchanged. Still a very swingy but high damage ceiling power. You may spend 1 chi to reroll any of these dice. That's good. And the knockdown power is reduced down to 12. If you are on Beatdown Monk and you see this, even though this is a hard to roll for ability, you buy this upgrade in the early game, you buy this upgrade in the mid game, and probably if you can afford it, you buy it in the late game. Because if you get this power, you want to have the ability to re-roll those damage dice and push as much damage as you can into those turns when you're actually coming in with a strong attack. This is a very good upgrade. Yes, there's going to be times with a hero as economy starved as the monk is, he has no combat point generation. There are going to be times where you have to sell this. That where, man, I need this 6-it, or I need this, I have to sell this to be able to play not this time next turn. So it's not like a 100% play every single time, but it's like 98%. You play this card a lot, especially if you're on the beatdown monk path. Now, if you're on the defense monk path, you probably don't have the extra combat points for this. If you get this ability, you probably still take it as a defensive monk, but you're not chasing it, and it's not really where you want to be spending your chi. Keep in mind, beatdown monks spend their chi to hurt you. Turtle monks spend their chi to not get hurt themselves. So a lot of what this upgrade does, it is extremely good, but I think it's a little bit matchup dependent. You care about this card maybe more than any other card if you're a beatdown monk, and you maybe don't even play this card if you're on the defensive strategy. It's still a good card. I mean, I think you want to play it even if you're on the defensive strategy, but it's going to come down to resources. So let's move on to the Fist of Harmony. So this is the Monk's Small Straight, deal 6, then gain 2 chi. So I talked about how the backup roll on the Meditate upgrade basically does exactly this, and I was like, yeah, that's good. That is easier to roll for than a small straight. As far as small straights go, I'm deeply unimpressed with this one. It's fine. You'll take it if you get it. It does essentially, if the chi is allowed to stick around for a turn, it does put out average damage. It gets you to that 8. That's where we want to be. Small straights are not that hard to go for. I'm not super excited about this power, but this is not a power that you feel bad when you have to activate. It's useful for both strategies. The chi is nice if you want to soak a little bit of damage, and you can push a little bit of damage through with this, so it's fine. The upgrade, Fist of Harmony 2, costs 1, and you gain 1 extra chi. I feel like this is a comfortable sell in all games that you play with the monk. This is an upgrade that I do not play. This is an upgrade I do not want to play. I don't think it's particularly bad. Like, getting 3 chi is better than 2, but is it worth a combat point and then you have to use your whole turn on some subsequent turn to actually roll for this thing? I don't want to be chasing small straights with the monk. I think this is a very, very sellable upgrade. I don't think it's a difficult choice on that one. All right, let's move down to the Fist of Tranquility. So you get 7 damage, and then you get evasive and 3 chi. This is much better than the small straight, as it should be. Large straights generally are better than small straights. I like that it gets you to a 10 damage ceiling, assuming that the chi can be spent on damage. If you're Turtle Monk and you end up on this, you like the evasive. You like being able to completely stop an attack, take 3 damage off another attack, and dealing 7 damage is fine. It's fine. So this is a pretty okay large straight. Compared to some of the others that exist in the game, It certainly has some weaknesses, but that, again, this is the thing with the monk, is so much of his stuff in a vacuum, there are other powers out there that are better, but the average, like the tapestry of the whole monk board, kind of plays together in such a way that he can put out deceptively large amounts of damage when the chi is being pumped into his damage, and he can avoid deceptively large amounts of damage coming back at him. He's neither a shadow thief nor a pyromancer, but it kind of an interesting middle ground between these two extremes, and he can flutter between them. And that flexibility is where a lot of the monk's value comes from. So you look at a character like the barbarian, clearly what this guy does is have raw stats on the board, things that are relatively straightforward to roll for. You don't have to make a lot of like intricate turn by turn decisions. You kind of know what you're doing every single time with the barbarian. The monk is forcing you to contemplate what your opponent is doing. You have to know what your opponent wants to do in order to best know how to counteract that. If you think about the like yin and yang theme, the theme of balance within the monk, you have to balance what your opponent is doing. So if your opponent's trying to go very slow and controlly, you got to speed that game up because you need to get it to your tempo. If your opponent's trying to be very quick, you go into your turtle mode and you slow the game down so that you can keep it at your tempo. All right, so let's take a look at the upgrade. Fist of Tranquility 2 costs 2, deals the same damage, lets you gain an evasive, 3 chi, inflict a knockdown. Let's compare that to the original power a little bit. Just the added knockdown, just the addition of the weakest thing the monk does. Then we have the Way of the Monk. It requires 1 of every die face, 2 evasive, and 3 undefendable damage. Undefendable damage is something that we do care about. This roll objective feels kind of insane for only 3 undefendable damage. Now, like a lot of stuff with the monk, the value of the damage is not what's printed on the card, it's what you can get out of it through the use of your chi. So 3 undefendable damage could be as much as 8 undefendable damage if you've got a full stack of chi on you. So there is something there, but I'm probably not playing this card. I don't think I'm chasing large straights with the monk. Generally speaking, large straights are more vulnerable to dice manipulation from your opponents. I will often take a small straight on the second roll and not even go after the large straight if my opponent's showing cards and coins that they could use to mess with me. Further, even if this was a character that I really wanted to push and try to get those large straights with, where are you spending your cards and coins? Like, Shadow Thief can chase large straights because he's got all the cards in the deck in his hand and he has 900 coins in his coin purse. Monk is not playing that way. Monk is going to have to think about his dice manipulation effects as ways to make sure he doesn't whiff his awkward dice rolls or ways to disrupt the opponent. The idea that you would try to take and force a straight with Monk, I just don't think that's where you're not going to have the resources available, and if you do, there's better places where you could spend them. So while there are things that I like about this card, the primary ability is something I'm not going to be chasing as the monk, and the secondary ability, as delicious as undefendable damage is a bunch of die faces that, again, I'm not chasing this. That is the Way of the Monk is not something I'm going to go after. It is a fallback ability, and it's a good fallback ability. But I have to spend 2 combat points to get this card into play. I think this is very often going to be a sell. All right, so let's move up to the mini ult, the Lotus Strike. Deal 5 undefendable damage and increase the chi stack limit by 1, then gain 5 chi. So earlier we talked about an upgrade that allowed you to gain 6 chi. This is one of the ways that you can increase your chi stack limit. I mean, if you get it, you take it, right? Like any mini ult, most of the time when you end up on a mini ult, it's because you went for an ult and your opponent pushed you off of it with a helping hand or something. 5 undefendable damage is a relevant large number. When you add 5 chi to that, it becomes 10 undefendable damage on a mini ult. That's really good. Increasing the stack limit is really good. Everything about this power is good. No matter what your strategy is, no matter who you're facing, if you can do this power, you do it. Do you pour a bunch of cards into going after this? Well, probably not. Like, if you're going to have to use a bunch of cards to get to an ability and it's going to use this many 6s, you probably push for the ult. But we'll get to that in a second. First, let's take a look at the upgrade for the Lotus Strike. Takes us up to Lotus Strike 2, costs 2 combat points, a relevant number in a hero as economy throttled as the monk is. 6 undefendable damage, increase the chi stack limit by 1, and gain 6. So it gives you one more chi than the original, only gives you 5, and it gives you 1 more undefendable damage. That's all good. Way of the Lotus requires 3 6s, deal 2 undefendable damage, then gain evasive and 2 chi. I don't think you care about this fallback option, other than the fact, like, if you're going to go for 3 one-of die faces, we go for Tempest Rush, right? That's what we want. But sometimes you go for the ult and your opponent pushes you off of it with a twice as wild, so you end up on the Way of the Lotus. No, I don't think you play this upgrade. I think 2 is expensive. You don't want to be rolling for either of these abilities. Chasing 6s, and I know some of my casual players will look at this next sentence and be like, nah, you got it wrong. We're doing it right. And that's fine. Play the way that makes you happy. But in my opinion, chasing 6s is not the way to go. It's not the way to successfully collect wins. And really, ultimately, that's what I'm wanting to do. That's what this video is about, is trying to help you win more games. Not so much about helping you maximize your fun. If winning is fun for you, then there you go. I will play all kinds of upgrades in casual for funsies games at the kitchen table, and I think that's where this upgrade largely belongs. It does have some good stuff on it. I'm not trying to throw too much shade at the Lotus Strike upgrade, but you've only got so many combat points. You've only got so many dice fixing cards. How often are you going to get this power? I have a really hard time seeing the games where this card gets used often enough, or these powers get triggered often enough to actually be worth the 2 combat points you have to spend, plus the fact it's actually kind of like 3, because you can't sell this card once it's in play. You could have sold this. Is this worth 3 combat points? I think emphatically the answer is that it's not. So in my opinion, this is an easy sell for a hero that you know is going to have to sell some cards in every single game. They just don't have the economy otherwise. To the defense power, let's take a look at Serenity. So you roll 4 dice, you gain a chi on a 4 or a 5, and you deal a damage on a 1 or a 2. The potential to put 4 damage back into your opponent's face is there. How often is it going to happen? Well, not that often. The potential to get 4 chi is there, but again, not that often. More than likely, you're going to deal a couple of damage, maybe gain a chi or 2, and maybe have a die that doesn't do anything. So as far as defense powers go, I think this is fine. It's giving you the economy pieces that you really want, the things that you need to keep your engine going, whether you're a damage output monster on the beatdown path or a damage reduction turtle on the defense path. This power plays into both of those. I do think you want to activate this. While it's not like the strongest defense in a vacuum, in the monk's economy, gaining that extra chi, and particularly on defense monk, getting that extra little bit of chip damage in where you don't have to run your face into their defense, these are things you really want. So in the tapestry of the monk, like within his kit, I think this defense is excellent. Even though, again, in the vacuum or compared to defenses on other heroes across the game, it does look a little weaker compared to some others. But you got to look at his kit as a whole, maybe more than any other character. Each individual part of the monk is definitely less than the sum of its parts. When you add it all together, you get this synergistic machine that goes above and beyond just the raw numbers on paper. Almost the exact opposite of the barbarian, where the guy, it's all on paper. Okay, let's take a look at the upgrade for this ability, Serenity 2. This costs 2. That is a not irrelevant cost. You get 1 extra die. This is going to allow you to gain extra chi and extra damage over the course of the game. I think whether you play this or sell this is almost more dependent on your matchup than anything else. Yes, late game, it's probably a sell. You need this on, or you want this online early in the game and throughout the middle section of the game to really get the value of it. If it's the last turn of the game, this is an irrelevant card to play. So setting aside those cases, I think what you really need to think about is how often are you going to be triggering this defense. If you're fighting a ninja, you sell this card. Because ninja's going to come at you with so much small, undefendable damage. Their whole board is undefendable damage. You're not going to get the value out of it. Against somebody else who has like a lot of defendable stuff, Moon Elf, I guess, is probably the go-to example of a hero that has very few ways to do undefendable. This is a great card to play. So Think about your matchup, think about the way your opponent's going to be attacking you, and the more they're going to engage with your defense, the better this card looks. And I think that's just the choice you have to make as the monk player. Am I going to play this upgrade that's good, or am I going to play this dice fix card? Like, you're going to have to make choices on your cards, and I think in a ninja like matchup, this is probably one of the cards that you sell against a lot of other heroes. Most heroes don't have a ton of ways to deal undefendable, so against a lot of the field, this is something you want to play in the early game to mid game. But again, your economy is so tight, every combat point matters. So in the matchups where the defense is going to be less relevant, I think you have to sell this. Like, it's almost a non-option. If you want to win games with Monk, you can't be spending combat points on things that don't impact the game. And a defense upgrade into a ninja, that's not impacting the game. All right, so let's take a look at Serenity 3. This upgrade costs 3. You get to roll 5 dice. You gain 1 chi per 4 or 5, deal 1 damage per fist. On a 5/6, you get an evasive or a cleanse. So we look at that compared to the other 2 levels. You have that additional evasive or cleanse that you can choose from. And getting an evasive and then immediately popping it, like if you had a bad dice roll, like that feels pretty meaningful to me. But how often are you going to see both of those things? Again, this really comes down to matchup. If your opponent is not going to be hitting you with defendable damage, your mileage out of this is going to be much lower. I do like Serenity 3 more than Serenity 2. Having the chance to get an evasive on your defensive roll is a ton of pressure to put somebody under. It forces them to make weird choices. Uh, Man, is that evasive going to show up? Should I save this dice manipulation card to make sure they don't get that evasive? Like, there's some weird decision space that you can kind of put your opponent into by threatening a defense that can give evasive. But man, 3 combat points is a lot for a guy that doesn't generate any extra combat points. I don't know. Against matchups where you know you're going to be rolling your defense a lot early in the game, I think you probably try to find a way to afford this. Mid game, it's going to depend on what the texture of the rest of your hand looks like. If you're going down to 0 combat points to play this thing and then saying pass turn, I don't think you want to do that. Even though this is a good card, even though this is a good upgrade, it's so expensive for a character that doesn't have a lot of combat points. You got to be careful when you play this one, but it's certainly, I think, playable. All right, finally, we have to take a look at the monk's Transcendence. Oh, I guess his quote, I am the calm before the storm. Okay, so Transcendence requires 5/6s, and this is a pretty crazy ultimate. So you get an evasive, you get a cleanse, you inflict a knockdown. That's somewhat common. Lots of heroes have the ability where they ultimate and then they do all their status things. Then you deal 10 damage, which is decent damage. We've certainly seen ultimates that get bigger than that, but like that's in that threshold area of like, this is an ultimate. Once something's dealing 10 damage, that's where I start to think of it as more like an ult worthy amount of damage. This also increases your chi stack limit by 1 and gives you 6 chi. So this thing deals potentially a ton of damage. Now, you can't use the chi you get this turn to increase the ult, but let's say we had a 5 stack of chi going into this attack. Well, now it's 15. What if we've already increased our stack limit through use of Way of the Lotus? Well, now it's 16, 17 damage. This is a potentially huge damage ult that also does a bunch of other little things and either gives you the chi to protect yourself for that one last turn before you finish them off with your next attack, or juice up your next attack plus 6, which is a huge number. Like, not this time. How about chi this time? Very, very strong ult. But that's usually what ults are. Ults are strong. They're supposed to be strong, and this one is no exception at all. Okay, finally, we got to look at the rest of the monk's unique cards. So we'll start with Palm Strike. This costs 0, inflicts a knockdown on a chosen opponent. I mean, you sell it and gain 1 coin, or you use it and force your opponent to spend 2. I don't think it's great, but at 0 cost, you're probably going to play this some of the time. I actually think about this card as a way to just sell. I often when I'm playing Monk, I feel a little throttled by the economy. My coin purse is a little light. And this is one, even though it hurts my opponent more when I play it than it helps me when I sell it, At the end of the day, I got to worry about me. I got to make my choices. And I hate that feeling in games when I've got the card I need to fix the situation, but I can't afford to play it. So even if I'm like combat point rich early in the game and I feel like, oh, I don't need the extra one, this one finds its way into my sell pile somewhat frequently. That said, in certain matchups, like when you know your opponent is throttled, as badly throttled as the monk is, and has trouble generating combat points and getting extra cards, this is more powerful against a Pyro than it is against a Shadow Thief, for example. So that's something to think about. It is a little bit matchup dependent, but broadly speaking, this is a card I tend to find myself selling. Mystic Mantra. So this is a 3-cost card. It gives you 1 chi, an evasive, a cleanse, and inflicts a knockdown. So notably, there's a lot of other heroes that have these cards where you get all the stuff. Just the status effect potpourri. This one only costs 3 though. Most of the time these effects cost 4. This one's 1 cheaper. I guess that makes this one better than all the other get all the status effect cards. Can you afford 3 for this in a game? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Only 1 chi. The evasive could be really important. Having an evasive at the right time can sometimes decide the game, but do you spend 3 combat points for that? Seems tough to me. I feel like on this hero, knowing what I know about his economy, I find it really hard to think that you're going to have time to play this card and also be doing other meaningfully things. That said, if you're rolling lights out and you don't need upgrades and you don't need dice fixed cards, this is at 3 costs, this is a very good card. It just I don't so much look at this one as costing 3 as I look at the opportunity cost. What other things am I not able to do because I invested in these effects? And is that helping me win the game or spinning my wheels? Like Cleanse is a dead status effect in some matchups. Knockdown sometimes is relevant, sometimes is a dead status effect. All right, we've just taken half of this card. And depending upon the matchup, it might not do anything at all. So there's stuff to like here, but sell. I feel like it probably a sell. Probably a sell for me. Contemplate costs 0 and you gain 2 chi. I, I see no reason, but let me rephrase that. Outside of a very specific narrow band of reasons, I don't think you would ever sell this card. This is a play in Beatdown Monk. This is a play in Turtle Monk. The only time you're going to sell this is if you're like going into your kill turn and you're holding like 6-it and this card and no combat points. Or you're getting ready to pass and your opponent might be representing lethal and you're holding not this time and this card. So in a couple of really narrow situations, or maybe you're holding twice as wild and only have 2 combat points and you really want to force an ult here, something like that. So it's got to be the value proposition has to like the outcome of the game has to hinge on it to make me sell this card. This card is great. Like 2 chi, so potentially 2 damage for 0. That's infinite value. I mean, not quite. But this is a good card. This is a very strong card. Ruminate costs 3, gain 5 chi. Often this is a sell, but there are some games. Oh man, this is like a super expensive, not this time. Somebody like invests like, haha, I'm gonna get lethal, and they dump their whole hand into trying to stack damage on this attack, and then you pay 3, do this, reduce the damage by 5, and then we go into the next turn and they have nothing left. So this card is capable of some blowouts, but 3 is a really high price. So watch your moments. Don't try to force it. If you're trying to play Monk in a competitive situation, you have to be willing to sell this card. Like, you have to be ready to play it if the moment presents itself, but you also have to accept the fact that there's a lot about the gain 5 chi is a ton of value. If this card just said pay 3, deal 5 damage to your opponent, we'd play that all day long, of course. I would play an entire deck of 32, pay 3, deal 5 damage to your opponent cards. But it doesn't quite say that. So we have to be realistic about how deep into the game are we? Is this turn 4 or 5? Have we seen what status effects yet? Is your opponent camping? Because if you pay 3 for this and your opponent plays what status effects, ugh, like, do you just lose? Like, Is that an alternate win condition? You usually lose when that happens. So this card's a lot safer to play after your opponent plays their what status effect. So the timing of when you play it is important, and the cost is just, it may be prohibitive. There may be some games where as much as you want to play this, you just can't, and you have to sell it to make sure you can afford that Tempest Rush upgrade or that really important helping hand on a turn. It feels like this value might be a little bit of a trap. Like you see it and you're like, well, I just have to engineer a turn where I can afford it. And then it sits in your hand and does nothing. And there's other cards that you can't afford to play because you're not willing to pull the trigger on selling this one. So the value, the positive things about this card, I think are really obvious. I think everybody can see them. The thing that I think you need to get through your head if you want to win games at a competitive level with the monk is accepting how just locked down on combat points he is. And you have to get comfortable with the idea that sometimes you have to sell a really good card to make this guy work. What was that phrase in Croupier? Hold on tightly, let go lightly. Like that sounds very monkish, right? Be willing to part with your possessions of value in order to find the path to transcendence. Uh, that's a lot to say about a card that's like, hey, it's really good, but you probably have to sell it sometimes. Okay, finally, the promo card. These are often the same with all the heroes. They cost nothing. They're main phase. You roll one die. If you roll 1 through 5, you draw another card, and on 6, you get good stuff. So the character-specific good stuff on Enlightenment is 2 Chi, an Evasive, and a Cleanse. Those are all really good. If you're playing in an event where promo cards are legal, you definitely play the promo card. There's no reason not to. Yeah, as far as promo cards go, this is another one. They're all kind of the same. Okay, so to summarize, if you're playing against a monk, your most valuable tool is your what status effects. If you are a beatdown hero, if you're a pyromancer, you have to expect the monk to try to use his tools to stretch the game out and make it last as long as possible and slow you down. And really the answer to that is just hit harder. If you are on the control path, you have to expect the monk to try to beat you down and try to get you dead before you get to your end state, whether that's Black Widow with all her upgrades or the control artificer with all of his bots. You know what your opponent is going to do. You know what the monk is going to do if they know what they're doing when you sit down in these matchups. So I think the best place to attack the monk, it's something I've really been hammering on for the majority of this video, is how throttled the monk's economy is. He has to make hard choices about where he puts his combat points. So as soon as the monk puts down that upgrade for Tempest Rush, you know what he wants to do. You know, these flares go off like, oh, he tried to upgrade Meditate. How can we manipulate that? Dice fixing cards are really powerful against the monk because of his awkward die faces. Kind of like Huntress, she does really cool things, but sometimes those things are hard to get to, and sometimes the best answer for a hero with awkward die faces is to just save up your dice fix cards and wait for that turn where that paladin or that monk tries to push through an attack that they had to invest cards and coins and effort to get. And that's the attack that you manipulate, and you backbreak them. You spirit crush them, because that's what we do around here. We crush our opponents. So to counteract the monk, really, it's almost the same advice I would have for somebody who's playing as the monk. You kind of want to start by knowing your enemy. So it's a lot easier for the Shadow Thief player to know the monk in and out than for the monk to know every single hero in and out. So on some level, unless you're dealing with an experienced player, if somebody chooses the monk and they're less experienced, you probably have an advantage because the monk will kind of punish you if you play him incorrectly. If you are trying to save up your chi to do a big punch when you should be reducing damage, you probably don't win that game. So the first step in both defeating and winning games with the monk is know your enemy. You have to know your enemy, and everything else is like a flowchart that comes down from there. As the monk, if you want to win games, what does your enemy want to do? Do the opposite. Balance them out. Always think about it in terms of balance. And as the person playing against the monk, you know that that's what your opponent's going to try to do. So how do you disrupt that? Overall, I think the monk has a lot to offer, and it's within the tournament sphere where I think he really shines. At a casual kitchen table games, this is never a hero I grab. This is it kind of reminds me of Samurai in that he's like so kind of like middle of the road, but because of the way his sub economy works, he has these abilities to burst from being kind of middle into a really strong defensive character. Not the best in the game, not best in class, but he can shift from that middle of the road Samurai position into more like a defensive shell. And he has the flexibility to shift from that middle of the road Samurai position into an aggressive shell. That flexibility is the monk's greatest weapon. If you're the monk player and you know your opponent thinks you're going for one style or the other, sometimes if you make your opponent think you're going to turtle up and out of nowhere you Tempest Rush them for 15 damage, that can win the game on the spot. It can just flip things. Oh, geez, now they don't know what to think. Now they start making suboptimal plays because they don't know which version of the monk you're trying to be. So having the ability to flex between these things is really important, both mentally and also because the dice are going to force you to. When the dice force you to do the aggressive thing when you want to be defensive, don't let that throw you off your game. We have to maintain our balance, as in all things. So I think all of this comes together in such a way that when you enter the tournament space, the monk is a great choice because he has good game into a ton of different matchups. He can act as your anti-control tool and he can act as your anti-aggro tool. But he's not quite at the like hyper crazy power level where everybody goes, oh, he automatically has to catch a ban. This guy's out of control. So he ends up seeing more play in tournament situations than some other heroes that you might feel are more powerful than the monk. But that's his beauty, is that it's not about the raw power on the stats. It's about how you play the character, and that's where the value and frankly the fun comes from in this hero. So I think he has so many things to offer players in the hardcore tournament space. He's a great pick. He's unlikely to catch a ban, and he has really good options across a variety of different heroes. And that, I think, is why he has had such success in the competitive scene. But it all comes down to, again, maybe more than any other hero, it really comes down to piloting. You got to know, you have to have the balance to know what the right move is at the right time. And then on some level, you have to have the luck the dice are going to let you do what you want to do. So, all right, this has been a Monk review and analysis. For the build phase, I'm Mr. Ben. Go win some games.